The final act of World War II played out against a backdrop of cataclysmic destruction on the European continent. As the Third Reich collapsed in upon itself, the true horror of its regime came to light. The concentration camps, factories of death where unspeakable crimes against humanity were committed on an industrial scale. Among the guards and overseers of this horrific system were women, a fact history has often struggled to reconcile.
Let's unveil the secrets of time.
Daughters of the Reich, female guards of the Nazi camps. There was no singular day of liberation for the Nazi concentration camp system. The process was chaotic, mirroring the war's messy end. Camps further east, like Auschwitz, fell first to the advancing Red Army in early 1945. In the West, American and British forces encountered camps like Bergen-Belsen and Dachau as Germany crumbled. The scenes that awaited liberators were beyond comprehension. Corpses piled high, skeletal survivors barely clinging to life, and evidence of unimaginable brutality. Amidst this chaos, the fate of thousands of concentration camp guards hung in the balance. In the war's last stages, the SS, the architects of the camps, had become a disorganized rabble. Many guards, both male and female, attempted to fade into the civilian population. Some destroyed incriminating documents, discarded uniforms, and concocted cover stories. Others had fought and died in the desperate last battles against the Allies. However, many more found themselves facing a world turned upside down, their heinous wartime activities now under the harsh spotlight of retribution. Confusion reigned over who was responsible for apprehending and detaining camp personnel. Should they be treated as soldiers and interned in POW camps? Or were they criminals who needed to be prosecuted? This blurred jurisdiction, a consequence of the war's lawless conclusion, allowed some, especially those in the lower ranks, to evade immediate detection. The exact number of women who served as concentration camp guards during the Nazi era is difficult to pin down. Historians estimate that out of approximately 50,000 guards within the whole camp system, somewhere between 3,500 and 3,700 were female. While a minority, this still represents a significant number of women who, in some capacity, contributed to the machinery of genocide. Aufseherin, female overseer, was the most common title for these women. They were drawn from all walks of German life. Some were young women, lured by a respectable income and the promise of serving the fatherland in wartime. Others, more ideologically driven and sadistic, were attracted to the power it offered. The duties they performed ranged widely. Barrack overseers maintained a suffocating order within prisoner living quarters, their power extending to every minute detail of daily existence. Work detail supervisors pushed exhausted prisoners beyond their limits during forced labor, their brutality a constant reminder of the disregard for human life. Selection duty guards held the chilling power of life and death, a simple gesture consigning countless people to the gas chambers. And beyond these systematic horrors lay the special punishments, whippings, beatings, and the release of vicious dogs, horrifying testaments to the guards' capacity for cruelty and sadism. It's crucial to note that female guards didn't exist in a vacuum. A hierarchy of authority controlled life and death in the women's camps. Higher ranks commanded more responsibility and often participated in greater horrors. The further a woman climbed in this hierarchy, the less likely that her atrocities were solely the result of impulsive cruelty. Those in command positions directly contributed to the systemic operation of the camps themselves. Their actions were interwoven into the very fabric of the genocidal machine. This distinction between impulsive violence and calculated complicity would become a point of intense debate during the trials that followed the war. Trial of the Beasts. Female overseers face judgment. In the ashes of the Third Reich, amidst the millions of refugees and displaced persons, a manhunt of a different kind began. As Europe desperately sought a path to recovery, a reckoning was demanded for those who operated the concentration camps. The women who had once lorded over prisoners now found themselves the focus of international scrutiny. The immediate aftermath of the war was a time of jurisdictional chaos and competing priorities. The Allies set up a sprawling system of internment camps to detain a wide range of suspected Nazi collaborators and war criminals. Female guards, for the most part, initially ended up in the same sprawling facilities as male SS personnel, former Nazi officials, and others deemed potentially dangerous to the rebuilding of Europe. Within these camps, investigations gradually began. Former prisoners, now clinging tenuously to newfound freedom, were the most important source of evidence. Gathering their testimonies was a painstaking, emotionally fraught process. Many survivors were physically weakened and deeply traumatized, struggling to recount the horrors they'd endured. Language barriers and the sheer scale of the crimes added to the difficulty of compiling reliable evidence. Investigators faced several challenges unique to prosecuting female guards. Many women had used aliases or changed their maiden names upon marriage, making identification difficult. Additionally, prisoner testimony focused on sadistic acts committed by individuals. Often, witnesses might know a guard's nickname or recognize her face, but could not connect her to a real identity or a position within the camp hierarchy. Despite these hurdles, Allied war crimes investigators built files against hundreds of women. Former guards were interrogated, confronted with evidence where possible, and sorted broadly by their roles within the camp system. This tentative organization was crucial. With limited resources and an urgent need for justice, Allied prosecutors had to prioritize who would face trial and on what scale. One of the most famous high-profile military tribunals were the Nuremberg trials, which were focused primarily on top-ranking Nazi leaders. However, smaller-scale trials, specifically targeting concentration camp staff, began taking place as well. Among the accused in these early trials were a number of female guards, thrust into the glare of an international stage, still reeling from the exposed savagery of the Holocaust. In 1945, the British conducted the Belsen trial to hold accountable those responsible for atrocities in the Bergen-Belsen camp. Notable defendants included Irma Gries, dubbed the "beautiful beast" by the press due to her youth and sadism. Born in 1923 in Reschen, Germany, Irma's childhood was marked by hardship. Her mother ended her life by suicide in 1936. As a teenager, she became infatuated with Nazi ideology, drawn in by their promises of a strong, unified Germany and the distorted concept of racial superiority that resonated with her vulnerabilities. Gries's entry into the SS was driven by a combination of factors. Her fervent belief in Nazism, the allure of power and authority, and perhaps a sense of personal redemption from a difficult background, likely motivated her. In 1942, at the young age of 19, she volunteered as an Aufseherin, female guard, and was sent to Ravensbrück concentration camp for training. The training of SS female guards emphasized brutality and the dehumanization of prisoners. Gries proved an exceptionally quick learner, her ruthlessness earning her swift promotions. This rapid rise suggests not only her cruelty, but an eagerness to please her superiors and a terrifying detachment from human suffering. Gries's sadism emerged in full force as she served in the notorious camps of Ravensbrück, Auschwitz, and Bergen-Belsen. Her penchant for physical brutality knew few bounds. She regularly beat prisoners with her bare hands, a plaited whip, and a heavy knotted stick. Her ferocity left many with broken bones, disfiguring scars, and lasting disabilities. Gries employed dogs as part of her brutal reign in the Birkenau women's camp. Survivors recall her riding around camp on a bicycle with a dog at her side, accompanying the female inmates on their 16-kilometer trek to work. If they couldn't keep up with the column, she ordered her dog to attack them without mercy. She was known to make prisoners kneel for long periods of time. Prisoners also had to hold heavy rocks over their heads during long roll calls. They were also often forced to stand for hours in snow, ice, and rain from 3 a.m. to 9 a.m. If someone did not stand up straight, she would beat the prisoner with a rubber truncheon until the prisoner was unconscious. She also greatly increased the death counts by ordering selection parades. Another notorious female guard, who was to be trialed in the Belsen trials, was Elisabeth Volkenrath, a senior overseer. The hierarchy within Nazi concentration camps was a rigid structure built upon terror and subjugation. At the camp's helm were the SS commandants, followed by a tier of SS officers charged with specific areas of camp operation. Below them were a host of functionaries, including block leaders and female guards like Volkenrath. This pyramid of power allowed for the systematic abuse and exploitation of prisoners. Incidents of Volkenrath's cruelty abound. She was known to beat prisoners savagely with any object at hand, from whips to sticks to simply her bare fists. She relished doling out punishments, forcing prisoners to kneel for hours in agonizing positions or stand outside in freezing weather. Volkenrath's ruthlessness extended to even manipulating prisoner relationships for her amusement, playing upon rivalries and petty jealousies to further torture those under her control. The selection process was a nightmarish ritual where prisoners were lined up, their fates determined by the whims and prejudices of SS guards. Volkenrath took chilling pleasure in this task, casually deciding who would live and who would die with callous disregard. Survivors recall her presence, menacing and cold, as she selected the sick, the weak, and those deemed unfit for work for immediate extermination. In November 1944, as the tides of war began to turn against Germany, Volkenrath was transferred to the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. Originally not designed as an extermination camp, Bergen-Belsen became a horrific symbol of Nazi depravity in the war's final months. The liberation of the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp in April 1945 shocked the world. The images of skeletal prisoners, piles of unburied corpses, and the sheer scale of human suffering exposed the depth of Nazi depravity. Among those captured by British forces were camp guards Irma Grace and Elisabeth Volkenrath. Subsequent trial, known as the Belsen trial, would raise profound questions about justice, accountability, and the complexities of female perpetration in the Holocaust. Both Grace and Volkenrath were young when apprehended. Grace was a mere 22 years old, while Volkenrath was in her early 40s. The Belsen trial commenced in Lüneburg, Germany, in September 1945, before a British military tribunal. 45 former SS men and women were put on trial, including former camp commandant Josef Kramer. The charges ranged from war crimes to specific acts of murder and ill treatment of concentration camp prisoners. Survivor testimonies became the backbone of the prosecution's case, painting a horrifying picture of the conditions at Bergen-Belsen and the sadism exhibited by many of the guards, particularly Irma Grace. Defense tactics employed by the accused generally followed two lines: denial and the claim of following orders. Volkenrath insisted that she was merely an administrator and unaware of the full extent of the atrocities committed at her camp. Grace, however, adopted a more defiant stance, showing little remorse even when confronted with overwhelming evidence. Public reaction to the trial was a mix of shock, anger, and a thirst for retribution. The press played a significant role in shaping public perception, often referring to Grace as the beautiful beast. The focus on her youth and appearance seemed to heighten the fascination with how a seemingly ordinary woman could become so monstrous. On the other hand, witnesses described Volkenrath with a mixture of fear and some pity. She was portrayed as a harsh but rather pathetic figure, easily cowed by Camp Commandant Kramer. Grace, however, became the trial's focal point. The horrific acts she was accused of formed a disturbing juxtaposition that both horrified and captivated the public. After weeks of harrowing testimony, the verdict came down in November 1945. 11 of the defendants were sentenced to death, including Kramer, Grace, and Volkenrath. The trial sought to establish individual culpability within a vast system of state-sanctioned brutality. However, a lingering question remained. Were Grace, Volkenrath, and others merely cogs in the Nazi machine, following orders from above, or did they take perverse pleasure in their actions? The chilling truth is likely a combination of both. The Nazi system brutalized its perpetrators, indoctrinating them with a racist ideology that dehumanized their victims. This provided fertile ground for sadistic tendencies to take root. In the camps, guards were given absolute power over life and death, creating an environment where cruelty could flourish unchecked. The issue of female perpetrators in the Holocaust adds an additional layer of complexity. Historically, women have often been viewed as inherently nurturing and less prone to violence. The actions of women like Grace and Volkenrath challenge this assumption, forcing us to confront the fact that women are as capable of evil as men when given the opportunity and the ideological framework to justify it. These early trials proved to be both groundbreaking and controversial. They presented survivors with their first real chance to confront their tormentors in a legal setting. The sentences were harsh, including multiple death penalties, long prison terms, and in a few cases, acquittals. However, the chaotic end of the war had given many female guards a head start on evading justice. Some successfully masqueraded as ordinary civilians, blending into the flood of refugees in a Germany preoccupied with survival. Without a robust, centralized system for identifying and tracking war criminals, particularly the more low-level Aufseherinnen, detection often relied on chance or betrayal by former colleagues. Still waters run deep, evil past of Hermine Braunsteiner. The idea of an ordinary life, home, marriage, perhaps children, is often a beacon of normalcy after tumultuous times. Yet, for Hermine Braunsteiner, the seemingly mundane existence she built in an American suburb hid a monstrous past, one that eventually caught up with her in a groundbreaking legal battle. Braunsteiner was born in Vienna in 1919 to a working-class family. Her life before the rise of Nazism was unremarkable. She worked as a domestic helper and later in a factory. Not particularly ideological, she was likely drawn to the SS by the promise of respectable work and the potential for social advancement within the Third Reich. In 1939, she received her first posting as an Aufseherin at Ravensbrück concentration camp, a facility specifically for women. From the start, she was marked by a shocking level of cruelty. Prisoners reported her routinely beating them with fists and whipping them sadistically. She took particular pleasure in tormenting children, kicking them ferociously for minor infractions. In 1942, she was transferred to Majdanek, a sprawling death camp on the outskirts of Lublin, Poland. Here, Braunsteiner's brutality escalated. She was known to participate in selections, dragging screaming women and children toward the gas chambers. Survivors recalled her stomping boots, often steel-plated, used to deliver fatal kicks with horrifying force. It was at Majdanek that the prisoners bestowed upon her a nickname that would follow her to her grave, the Stomping Mare, or the Mare of Majdanek. As the war neared its end, Braunsteiner fled back to Austria. She managed to slip into anonymity, marrying an American soldier named Russell Ryan in the 1950s. In 1959, she emigrated to the US with her husband, eventually settling into a quiet life as a housewife in Queens, New York. To those who knew her, she appeared unremarkable, the image of an ordinary immigrant woman who had achieved some sliver of the American dream. Her past, however, was not as neatly buried as she believed. The name Hermine Braunsteiner was on a list of wanted war criminals. Simon Wiesenthal, the legendary Nazi hunter, was relentless in his pursuit. In 1964, following a tip-off, he discovered her living under her married name in Queens. The gears of justice began to turn, albeit slowly. The case of Hermine Braunsteiner Ryan became a landmark in international law. She was the first Nazi war criminal ever to be extradited from the United States. It was a protracted, complex legal fight that played out under the public eye, testing not only the US commitment to confronting the horrors of the past, but also raising questions about guilt, deception, and the long reach of history. West Germany made an initial extradition request in 1967, accusing Braunsteiner of complicity in the murder of over 80 people. However, American legal authorities found the evidence insufficient. Wiesenthal and others pushed back, gathering additional survivor testimony to bolster the case. In 1971, a revised extradition request was launched, accusing Braunsteiner of participation in the murder of 200,000 individuals, a more accurate representation of the sheer scale of Majdanek's killing machine. Braunsteiner fought back. She claimed to have been a prisoner herself at Ravensbrück, a bold lie. Her defense painted her as a powerless woman coerced by the Nazis, not a willing participant in their crimes. This argument, however, fell apart in the face of the overwhelming and detailed survivor testimony about her sadism. In 1973, she was formally stripped of her American citizenship. The way was cleared for extradition that same year. Newspapers reported her being carried screaming onto the plane bound for Germany, a dramatic final act in her American chapter. There was no legal precedent for the US to deport a citizen for Nazi-era crimes. Braunsteiner's case laid the groundwork for future cases and showed a willingness by the US to cooperate, even decades later, in bringing perpetrators to justice. Hermine Braunsteiner-Ryan was tried in West Germany in 1981 and found guilty of murder, incitement to murder. She received a life sentence and died in prison in 1999. As the Second World War came to an end, the world began to fully comprehend the atrocities committed in the Nazi concentration camps. The Stutthof concentration camp, established in 1939 near Gdansk, Poland, was one of the many sites of terror during the Holocaust. The camp operated from September 2, 1939 to May 9, 1945, and housed more than 110,000 prisoners, including Jews, political prisoners, Soviet POWs, and others deemed undesirable by the Nazi regime. Tens of thousands of prisoners died there from starvation, disease, forced labor, and execution. Among those who played a role in these horrors were female guards, whose actions were later subject to judicial and historical scrutiny. On July 4, 1946, 200,000 people in Gdansk gathered to witness the executions of former guards of the Stutthof concentration camp. High upon the Biskupia Gorka hill, a group of female guards, found guilty of crimes against humanity, were brought out to meet their fate.
Let's unveil the secrets of time.
From Stutthof to the gallows, the justified execution of Iwa parodies. Stutthof, a notorious concentration camp, opened shortly after World War II began. In 1944, the number of inmates surged, particularly with Jewish prisoners from camps like Auschwitz. To manage the increased population, new guards were recruited, many from the local area. Conditions at Stutthof were deplorable, with starvation, disease, and epidemics like typhus claiming thousands of lives. Daily executions were routine, carried out by firing squads and gas chambers, with some prisoners brutally beaten to death by the guards. An estimated 65,000 people were killed in Stutthof, many through forced labor. Stutthof's operations were managed by both male and female guards, with the latter proving to be just as brutal as their male counterparts. Many of the female guards at Stutthof participated in the infamous selections, where prisoners were chosen for immediate execution or forced labor. These guards also oversaw the appalling living conditions, engaged in the abuse of prisoners, and sometimes took part in direct acts of violence. Their post-war trials would expose the full extent of their cruelty. One of the female guards, Iwa Parodies, was drafted in August 1944. Known for her brutality, Parodies trained as an Aufseherin or overseer at the Stutthof SK3 camp. She quickly developed a reputation for cruelty, often beating prisoners with a whip or other weapons. After completing her training, she was appointed as a wardress. By October 1944, she was transferred to the Bromberg Ost subcamp of Stutthof, and in January 1945, she returned to the main Stutthof camp. In April 1945, Parodies was involved in one of the final transports of female prisoners to the Lauenburg subcamp, after which she fled. A prisoner in her capture recounted she was put on trial as a defendant in the Stutthof trial. One witness testified,
"She ordered a group of female prisoners to undress in the freezing cold of winter and then doused them with ice-cold water. When the women moved, Parodies beat them."
The widely recognized Nuremberg trials primarily focused on the evidence of war crimes and crimes against humanity committed by the leadership of the Third Reich, with concentration camps serving as key evidence. In addition to these prominent trials, a number of lesser-known proceedings targeted the staff of various concentration camps. Poland conducted 4 trials in Gdansk, specifically aimed at former guards and kapos from Stutthof, prosecuting them for war crimes and crimes against humanity. The Stutthof trials were a series of dramatic war crimes tribunals held in post-war Poland, aimed at bringing to justice those responsible for the horrific murders of up to 85,000 prisoners at the Stutthof concentration camp during the Nazi occupation of Poland in World War II. Despite the gravity of their crimes, none of the Stutthof commandants were tried within Poland. Notably, SS Sturmbannführer Max Pauli faced trial not for his role at Stutthof, but for his command of the Neuengamme concentration camp in Hamburg. He was executed in 1946, though his trial did not address the atrocities at Stutthof. The first of these Polish trials took place in Gdansk from April 25th to May 31st, 1946. Following this, additional sessions were held at the same court on October 8th to 31st and November 5th to 10th, with the final session for that year running from November 19th to 29th. A 5th trial occurred in Toruń in 1949, and the 6th and final trial in Poland was held in Gdansk in 1953. Out of the approximately 2,000 SS personnel who operated the camp complex, 72 SS officers and 6 female overseers were ultimately brought to justice. On July 4th, 1946, Ewa Paradis, at just 25 years old, was executed on Biskupia Gorka Hill. A massive set of gallows was erected for the occasion. As the truck moved away, leaving her suspended from the gallows, it took several minutes for her to die from strangulation. She was one of many female guards who turned to extreme brutality in the concentration camps. The decision to hold public executions was controversial, but was justified at the time by the need to demonstrate that justice had been served for the millions of lives lost in the Holocaust. These women, who had once wielded power over life and death within the camps, were now facing their own demise in a similarly public and brutal manner. From Devotion to Death, the brutal execution of Elizabeth Becker. Elizabeth Becker was born on July 20th, 1923, in Danzig. Her family was German, and as the Nazis rose to power, she joined the League of German Girls, the female wing of the Nazi Party. This organization was the only state-sanctioned youth group for girls in Nazi Germany, with compulsory membership. At its peak, it had over 4.5 million members. The League indoctrinated girls with Nazi ideology, training them for roles in German society as wives, mothers, and housewives, in line with Hitler's vision of women as loyal bearers of children for the Reich. The girls were taught Nazi songs, underwent physical training, and participated in large sports events. The organization also encouraged loyalty to the Nazi regime over one's family, and members were required to complete a year of land service, working on farms to demonstrate their dedication. At the outbreak of World War II, the League justified the invasion of Poland as a punishment for so-called subhuman people, ramping up Nazi propaganda. Many girls from the League sought careers within Nazi institutions, including the SS and concentration camps. Notable members like Irma Grese, who would later become infamous for her brutality in the camps, were shaped by this indoctrination. Becker joined the League at the age of 13, becoming a devoted Nazi, likely influenced by her family. By 1938, at the age of 15, she began working as a tram conductor in her hometown of Danzig. She also held various jobs in local businesses and worked as an agricultural assistant, staying close to home throughout her early career. As the war progressed and local men were drafted, the SS began recruiting women to work in concentration camps. Adverts were placed in towns and cities, calling for women to train as guards. Becker responded possibly due to limited options, and was assigned to the Stutthof concentration camp. Stutthof was established following the invasion of Poland and became a full concentration camp by 1942. Initially small, it was later expanded with 30 new barracks, a crematorium, and a gas chamber in 1943 to facilitate mass executions. The camp housed Polish prisoners and others targeted by the Nazis, with thousands suffering brutal conditions.
Then you walked out and they said "Anziehen," meaning get dressed. These were the striped horror clothes. If anybody had put dress with nails on the inside on you, that's what it would have felt like. They scratched you to pieces. You didn't have fat on you, at least I didn't. It scratched and made my skin bleed. That's what you put on. Over there is a row with what they called shoes. They were wooden soles with flat boots. Nobody cared what size you needed. You put those on and you went. All I kept looking for was where are the others, my sister and mother. That was my total worry.
Becker, alongside notorious female guards like Jenny Wanda Bachmann and Anna Birkenthal, became known for her involvement in the camp's transports of women, and men were sent from camps like Auschwitz to Stutthof, where conditions were extremely harsh. Tens of thousands succumbed to starvation and disease epidemics sweeping through the camp. Executions were regularly carried out, with many prisoners being shot or gassed. Inmates also suffered at the hands of medical staff, who injected sick prisoners with phenol to kill them, and guards who brutally beat prisoners to death. The forced labor imposed on inmates was grueling, with insufficient rations provided for the work they were made to do. Elisabeth Becker, a guard at Stutthof, gained a reputation for her brutality. Despite being in her early 20s, she instilled such fear that many female prisoners were reluctant to even look her in the eye. As a staunch Nazi, Becker was involved in the daily selection process, where weak or sick inmates were chosen to be sent to the gas chambers. Her actions resulted in the deaths of many women and children. After the war, numerous female guards, including Becker, were tried for their roles in these atrocities. Becker continued working at Stutthof until she fled on January 15, 1945, fearing capture by advancing enemies. She was eventually arrested by Polish authorities and imprisoned while awaiting trial. In the first Stutthof trial, held in Danzig, Becker faced charges alongside 5 other women. Witnesses testified to her brutality and her role in selecting prisoners for execution. Becker confessed to selecting at least 30 women for the gas chambers. Becker wrote multiple letters to Polish President Bolesław Bierut, appealing for her death sentence to be reduced. The court had recommended commuting her sentence to 15 years, arguing that her actions were less severe than those of her co-defendants, Gerda Steinhoff and Jenny Wanda Bachmann. Additionally, Becker had served the shortest tenure at the camp. The Polish president refused to pardon her, and on July 4, 1946, Elisabeth Becker was executed. The execution took place at Biskupia Gorka, where a large crowd of 200,000 gathered to witness. Becker and the other condemned guards were brought out, and as preparations were made, she was placed on a truck under the gallows. The noose was put around her neck, and after the final arrangements, the truck drove off, leaving her hanging. Within minutes, Elisabeth Becker was pronounced dead. At just 22 years old, she was held responsible for the deaths of at least 30 women due to her role in the gas chamber selections. Her execution was seen as justice for the cruelty and brutality she inflicted, and the large crowd witnessed her punishment as a reminder of her war crimes. Jen Wanda Bachmann, The Execution of the Beautiful Spectre. Born on May 30th, 1922, Jenny Wanda Bachmann was from Hamburg and grew up in a modest household. Raised by her father, a dock worker, and her mother, a housewife, the family struggled financially. As a child, Jenny dreamed of becoming an actress and pursued a career in fashion modeling after her schooling. Noted for her appearance, she continued working in the fashion industry even after World War II began, participating in photo shoots and advertisements. In early 1944, Bachmann's life took a drastic turn. She abandoned her modeling career after responding to an advertisement from the German SS seeking women for work in concentration camps. At just 21, she might have been motivated by financial gain, career advancement, or a desire for power. After passing her interview, she trained as an overseer and was assigned to the Stutthof concentration camp, known for its extreme brutality. Upon her arrival at Stutthof, Bachmann quickly exhibited her brutal nature. She gained a reputation for extreme cruelty, beating inmates to near death before sending them to the gas chambers. Her sadistic behavior earned her nicknames like Mad Jenny and the Beautiful Spectre. Bachmann was involved in the daily selection process, deciding who would be sent to the gas chambers and personally responsible for many deaths, including those of women and children. As World War II neared its end and the Soviet Red Army advanced, Bachmann attempted to evade capture. She managed to avoid arrest until May 1945, when she was apprehended while boarding a train in Gdansk. Despite her attempts to downplay her actions and portray herself as a benefactor, descriptions from survivors and evidence from the camp painted a grim picture of her brutality. A prison guard initially sympathized with her, but upon witnessing the suffering she caused, he refused to release her. At her trial, numerous witnesses testified against her, and evidence of her cruelty was presented. Bachmann's defense argued she was insane and unfit for trial, but she appeared composed, often preoccupied with her appearance rather than her crimes. Her plea for clemency was denied, and she was sentenced to death. After she was found guilty, she declared, "Life is indeed a pleasure, and pleasures are usually short." On July 4, 1946, she was executed along with other convicted war criminals at Biskupia Gorka Hill near Gdansk. Over former Stutthof, prisoners volunteered to conduct the executions. Jenny Wanda Bachmann, only 24 at the time of her execution, had traded a potential career in modeling or acting for a life of violence and cruelty. She became infamous for her sadistic actions and was remembered alongside other notorious Holocaust guards like Irma Grace, Johanna Bormann, and Elizabeth Falkenrath. The true motives behind her descent into such brutality remain unclear. From housemaids to war criminals, the violent rise of female camp guards. Gerda Steinhoff was born on January 29, 1922, in Danzig. She had a modest upbringing and worked as a housemaid on a local farm during her teenage years. After finishing school, she worked in a bakery in Danzig from 1939 and later became a tram conductor. In 1944, Steinhoff married and had a child. That same year, she responded to a Nazi call for new concentration camp guards, as many former guards had been sent to fight on the front lines. Steinhoff underwent training at the Stutthof concentration camp and joined its staff on October 1, 1944, as a block leader overseeing a group of female prisoners. Stutthof, which had originally opened as a camp for forced labor, became a concentration camp in 1942. Initially surrounded by barbed wire and consisting of 8 barracks, the camp expanded significantly, adding new barracks, crematoria, and gas chambers by 1943. The camp's conditions were harsh, with thousands of prisoners dying from starvation, disease, and typhus epidemics. Many were executed daily by shooting, gassing, phenol injections, beatings, or drowning in mud. Prisoners were also exploited for forced labor in various industries.
We were first in a barrack together. Most of the barracks were a wooden stable. You've seen that, 3 people to a bunk. In the center there were 4 bunks. The horse blanket, the gray blankets that we called horse blankets, were so rough. In any case, you got 1 to a bunk. You do me a favor and tell me how you share that 3 people to a bunk. Nobody knew how to share it. The number of inmates decreased. People died like flies. We were again faced with this lack of water, lack of lavatories. There were latrines right over in the fields. They were just holes in the ground. You couldn't see in the dark. You were afraid to fall into them. It was slippery, especially when the winter came and it all froze over. You got a mug of coffee. I always say this black water that was called coffee, and after that you saved some to wash yourself. You have very good intentions at first. You really think you are going to rinse your mouth. Dental hygiene is very important. It wasn't then because you actually need the fluid in your body, so cleanliness goes to hell. Food you haven't got that would sustain you. After the first couple of days, you were being lined up to go to work, or by that time some looked worse again, and so the number got smaller. It was again right, left, right, left.
Steinhoff quickly demonstrated her brutality. She was known for her cruelty and sadism, often beating prisoners severely before sending them to the gas chambers. She was involved in the selection process that determined which prisoners would be sent to their deaths. By December 1st, 1944, Steinhoff was reassigned to a subcamp of Stutthof, known as Bromberg OST, located 105 miles south of Danzig. There, she was awarded a medal for her service to the Nazi regime. However, she continued to be a brutal overseer, known for whipping and beating prisoners. As the war drew to a close, Steinhoff abandoned her post and returned home to her family. She was eventually captured by Polish authorities on May 25, 1945, following the liberation of the camp. During the first Stutthof trial, witnesses testified about her brutality and involvement in the selections. Despite her relatively short tenure as a guard, Steinhoff was found guilty of crimes against humanity. On July 4, 1946, Steinhoff was executed at Biskupia Gorka Hill in Gdansk. Along with other condemned guards, she was taken to the site, placed on a truck, and led to the gallows. The noose was secured around her neck, and she was left to hang before a large crowd. At just 24 years old, Steinhoff's brutal actions had earned her a place among the most notorious female war criminals of World War II, remembered alongside figures like Elisabeth Falkenrath, Irma Graeser, and Johanna Bormann. Wanda Klaff, born Wanda Kalasinski, on March 6, 1922, near Danzig, was one of the camp's staff. Her parents were German, with her father working on the railways. The family changed their surname to Klaff in 1941. Wanda had a typical upbringing, completing her schooling and working in a jam factory until 1942. After briefly leaving work to become a housewife following her marriage, she returned to work as a streetcar operator due to financial need. In 1944, Klaff responded to a call from the SS seeking guards for concentration camps. She was recruited, trained at Stutthof, and then assigned to a subcamp named Proust, located in a nearby small town. There, she was known for her brutality, regularly whipping and assaulting the women prisoners. In October 1944, she was transferred to another subcamp in a small village, where she continued her harsh treatment of the approximately 300 women forced to perform strenuous labor. As Soviet forces approached, a large-scale evacuation of Stutthof and its subcamps began. Around 50,000 prisoners were marched towards the sea, where many were shot by machine guns. It's estimated that 25,000 prisoners died during these evacuations. Some guards, including Klaff, attempted to use the chaos as an opportunity to escape responsibility for their actions. Wanda Klaff was arrested on June 11, 1945, and held in a Polish prison, where she contracted typhoid fever, but survived. She was later tried at the Stutthof trials, alongside other former guards, such as Jenny Wanda Bachmann, Gerda Steinhoff, and Elizabeth Becker. Klaff was accused of daily beatings and other brutal acts. During the trial, she confessed with a disturbing sense of pride, claiming she struck at least 2 prisoners each day. Her candid admission did not bode well for her, and along with several other guards, Klaff was sentenced to death at the age of 24. After the war, many authorities were perplexed by how such young women could have become so brutal. On July 4, 1946, Wanda Klaff was removed from her prison cell and taken to Biskupia Gorka, a large hill in Gdansk. There, 20,000 spectators gathered to witness the executions of former Stutthof guards. At just 24 years old, Klaff was led to a truck where she was ordered to sit on a stool. The truck then reversed under a massive set of gallows erected on the hill, allowing the crowd a clear view of the proceedings. As she stood on the stool, a noose was placed around her neck and secured. The truck was then driven forward and Clough was hanged. She was left hanging until a doctor declared her dead. Clough, who had served in the concentration camp for about a year, was executed despite being one of the younger guards. While there were other female guards who had served longer and were never brought to justice, on that day in Gdansk, Clough faced the consequences of her actions. The large crowd of 20,000 witnessed her execution, a stark reminder of the brutal legacy of the Stutthof camp. The question of why these women participated in such atrocities has been the subject of much debate. Some historians argue that these women were products of the same indoctrination that affected the male SS guards, while others suggest that the women were motivated by a desire for power and authority in a society that traditionally restricted their roles. Whatever the motivations, the actions of these female guards left an indelible mark on the history of the Holocaust. The public hangings of female guards from Stutthof had a profound impact on post-war Europe's understanding of justice. While some saw the executions as necessary retribution for the horrors of the Holocaust, others questioned whether such brutality was the right response to brutality itself. The female guards, however, became symbols of how the Nazi regime had corrupted not just men, but also women, turning them into perpetrators of violence and cruelty. At the end of World War II, an American-controlled prison in Germany became notorious for its role in executing numerous former guards of Nazi concentration camps. This facility, often referred to as the Gallows of Dachau, was the site of several high-profile war crimes trials and executions. Among those executed were guards from Dachau, the first concentration camp established by the Nazis in 1933. Dachau became a symbol of Nazi terror and cruelty, with its operations marking the beginning of the regime's systematic persecution. Dachau was situated in Upper Bavaria, and over its 12 years of operation, imprisoned over 188,000 people, including political dissidents, Jews, Romani people, and others deemed undesirable by the Nazi regime. After the war, the American military used Dachau as a site for war crimes trials and the subsequent executions.
Let's unveil the secrets of time.
From Dachau to the gallows, the justified execution of Martin Weiss. Martin Gottfried Weiss was a notable figure among the guards. Born in Bavaria in June 1905, Weiss was raised Catholic and pursued mechanical engineering. He initially worked in the ironworks industry and later for an electric company. However, in the summer of 1926, he joined the Nazi Party as an early member. In April 1933, Weiss joined the SS and served as a guard at Dachau, which became a prototype for other Nazi concentration camps. The infamous slogan, "Arbeit macht frei," work sets you free, was inscribed at the camp's entrance. Dachau was the longest operating camp in Nazi Germany, imprisoning mainly German political prisoners initially. As the years passed, the number of inmates swelled, exceeding 188,000. The SS oversaw the camp's operations, using prisoners as forced labor for munitions production and camp expansion. The camp infrastructure included administrative buildings, barracks, a roll call square, and a notorious punishment block known for its brutality. SS guards, including Weiss, were instructed to treat prisoners as subhuman and were encouraged to be merciless. The punishment block at Dachau housed standing cells where prisoners were forced to stand for days without rest. Executions by hanging and shootings were commonplace, instilling fear among the prisoners. Weiss initially worked as an engineer at Dachau until February 1938, performing maintenance tasks before becoming an adjutant to the camp commanders, Hans Loritz and Alexander Piorkowski. In April 1940, Weiss was transferred to oversee the construction of the Neuengamme concentration camp near Hamburg, which began as a subcamp of Sachsenhausen. Neuengamme eventually became a full-fledged concentration camp, where 106,000 prisoners passed through, and approximately 43,000 died due to harsh conditions. As commandant, Weiss implemented policies of extermination through forced labor, leading to high mortality rates due to inhumane conditions, insufficient food, rampant disease, and scarce medical supplies. On September 1, 1942, Weiss returned to Dachau as commandant. Criticized for the deplorable conditions of the prisoners, he made some efforts to improve their situation, but continued to oversee large-scale killings. Weiss ordered hundreds of prisoners to be sent to Hartheim Castle, where they were euthanized. During his tenure, numerous prisoners were executed by hanging and firing squads. Weiss stated that the individuals who were shot dead were not prisoners of the Dachau concentration camp, but were instead prisoners of the Gestapo, who were the ones that issued the execution orders. He claimed that Himmler had sentenced these individuals to death. Some prisoners reportedly respected Martin Weiss, as he implemented some changes at the camp, such as allegedly banning deliberate beatings, allowing food parcels, and refusing Himmler's orders to bomb and burn Dachau. After his work there, he was appointed commandant of the Majdanek concentration camp, taking command on November 3, 1943. The next day, one of the worst massacres occurred, with over 70,000 Jews murdered in a single day. Some historians argue that Weiss was away preparing for his new role during the massacre. On his first day at Majdanek, he likely had to oversee a cleanup operation following the killings. In May 1944, he was promoted and later sent to the Mühldorf subcamp in November, where 2 underground plants were constructed to manufacture fighter planes using prisoners from Dachau. The Luftwaffe was suffering heavy losses, and inside these plants, they attempted to produce numerous aircraft for the war effort. Jewish prisoners working there were terrified of being gassed if they did not work hard enough. Many died due to the labor conditions and disease. Those unable to work were sent to Auschwitz to be killed. As the war was ending in April 1945, Martin Gottfried Weiss was possibly at Dachau to take over as commandant again. He was present during discussions about surrendering the camp to the Americans, but then fled. He was captured in Munich on April 29, 1945. Weiss was tried at the Dachau camp trials. The trial lasted from November 15 to December 13, 1945, ending with 40 convictions. Witnesses testified about the horrific treatment of prisoners. Martin Gottfried Weiss was found guilty of violating the laws and customs of war, having overseen several concentration camps where thousands died or were executed due to the conditions he enforced. Martin Weiss was sentenced to death for his war crimes and his role as commandant at Dachau and other camps. Martin Gottfried Weiss was executed on the same day as many of his former staff, who were also convicted war criminals. He was escorted from his cell at Landsberg by a large number of guards and military policemen to the courtyard, where his identity was confirmed by an official. A priest accompanied the group. Weiss was led up the gallows steps and handed over to the executioner. After offering a few last words, the executioner placed a black hood over Weiss's head, secured the noose, and released the trapdoor, causing Weiss to plunge to his death. His death was confirmed, and his body placed in a coffin. The butcher of Dachau deserved execution of Alexander Piorkowski. Alexander Piorkowski was born in Bremen, Germany, on October 11, 1904. As a young man, he worked as a mechanic and traveling merchant. After World War I, he was drawn to Nazi politics and joined the SA, the Brown Shirts, in June 1929. He joined the SS in June 1933 and was a member of the Nazi Party. He was seen as a reliable leader, earning command of the SS Standarte in Bremen. The following year, he led the SS Standarte Allenstein. Despite his involvement with the SS, he retired for health reasons on September 19, 1936, but was still regarded as a reliable SS member. Himmler approached him to become commandant of the Lichtenberg concentration camp, a position he held from July to December 1937, before it was converted to an all-female camp. Lichtenberg was housed in a former Renaissance castle in Prettin, near Wittenberg in Saxony, and operated by the SS from 1933 to 1939. The camp saw several commandants, including Theodor Eicke, who also commanded Dachau, and Hermann Baranowski, a senior guard at Dachau. Initially housing 2,000 male prisoners, Lichtenberg transitioned to an all-female camp in 1937, predating Ravensbrück. When Lichtenberg closed in May 1939, all female prisoners were transferred to Ravensbrück, which became the main female camp in the Third Reich. Lichtenberg became overcrowded over time, with insufficient food rations and disease spread. Alexander Piłkowski remained until August 1938, then transferred to Dachau, where he initially served as a Schutzhaftlagerführer, overseeing economic production at the camp. Piłkowski was a crucial administrator, known for mistreating prisoners and driving them to work harder for Nazi profit. He maintained order, conducted roll calls, and ensured compliance with camp rules. He was promoted to Commandant of Dachau, overseeing a large SS operation. Dachau, a colossal concentration camp, saw over 40,000 deaths. Many prisoners were priests. Before Piłkowski's arrival, many deaths had already occurred. Under his command, over 4,000 Soviet prisoners of war were executed at a nearby SS shooting range in Hebertshausen, starting November 25, 1941. During his tenure, the number of prisoners at Dachau increased significantly. The camp was heavily guarded to prevent escapes, with guards willing to shoot prisoners who attempted to flee. The camp was a site of terror under Piłkowski's leadership, employing horrific torture methods to instill fear. Standing cells confined inmates in tiny spaces for days. Flogging occurred publicly, and prisoners were hanged from trees or poles. Executions were common for those unable to work. As time went on, conditions at Dachau worsened, with many dying from disease, exhaustion, starvation, and violence. During Alexander Piłkowski's tenure as Commandant of Dachau, conditions were so dire that some prisoners resorted to touching the electrified fence to end their suffering. Hundreds of priests were transported to Dachau, where many became subjects of horrific Nazi medical experiments. On August 31, 1943, Piłkowski was dismissed from his position due to corruption charges and embezzling money from the camp. This pattern of corruption was not uncommon among concentration camp commandants. After his dismissal, little is known about his activities until the end of World War II, when he was summoned by the US Army to stand trial for his crimes as Commandant of Dachau. Piłkowski's trial took place from January 6 to January 17, 1947. As part of the Dachau trials, he was charged with crimes against humanity, including deportation, abduction, and mistreatment of prisoners. Witnesses testified against him, leading to his conviction and a death sentence. Despite multiple petitions for a pardon, Piłkowski was executed on October 22, 1948, at Landsberg Prison, a site where many Nazi war criminals were hanged after the war. On the morning of his execution, Piłkowski was escorted from his cell by US military police and a priest, led to the gallows and hanged. His body was placed in a coffin after death was confirmed. As Commandant of Dachau, Piłkowski was responsible for the deaths of thousands, contributing to a reign of terror through brutal treatment and enforcing harsh conditions. While some debate exists about his level of direct involvement, as he often delegated responsibilities, his leadership nonetheless resulted in widespread atrocities. Death March to Liberation, the brutal fate of Dachau guards. Heinrich Wicker was born on June 30, 1921, in Bad Zwischenahn, Germany. As a teenager, he joined the Hitler Youth on September 9, 1933, where he and millions of other boys were trained for military service. They learned to use weapons and underwent military drills to prepare them for future service in Hitler's regime. Before his 16th birthday, Wicker joined the SS Totenkopfverbände, Death's Head units, the group responsible for staffing concentration camps. In November 1938, Wicker was stationed at Dachau, young men like him were sent there to train as guards. With the outbreak of World War II, Wicker became part of the Waffen-SS, participating in the invasions of the Netherlands, Belgium, and France. He was later transferred to the Eastern Front for Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. Wicker was wounded during the Battle of Demyansk and, deemed unfit for frontline duty, was reassigned. Wicker completed SS leadership courses, earning the rank of Obersturmführer. In June 1944, he was transferred to the Natzweiler Struthof concentration camp in occupied France, where he commanded a subcamp. Known for his brutality, he gained a fearsome reputation despite being only 23 years old. He became commandant of the Mannheim-Sandhofen subcamp in December 1944, benefiting from the reallocation of SS men to the front lines as Germany faced defeat. During his time at the subcamp, Wicker executed prisoners, including a Polish woman involved in sabotage. As the war drew to a close, he led death marches, forcing prisoners away from advancing Allied forces. On these marches, hundreds died from harsh conditions or were killed by Wicker's men. On April 28, 1945, he became the final commandant of Dachau. Wicker surrendered Dachau to General Henning Linden of the U.S. 42nd Infantry Division on April 29, 1945. Under his command were 560 SS men, many of whom were later executed. When American soldiers liberated the camp, they found 39 railway cars filled with over 2,000 corpses and emaciated prisoners wandering the grounds. The liberators, shocked and appalled by the conditions, encountered resistance from some SS guards who continued firing. Accounts of the liberation include instances of retribution against SS guards and prisoners taking revenge. Regimental records indicate that around 30 to 50 German guards were killed during the liberation, with some prisoners also participating in reprisals against their former captors. This violence was driven by the horrific conditions and brutal treatment they had endured. A scene of chaos and revenge unfolded. One SS officer tried to push past the prisoners, but their courage grew as they knocked him to the ground. It was unclear whether the prisoners stomped on him or not, but he was killed in the struggle. Some American guards reportedly ignored the killings that occurred as prisoners sought retribution. Walenty Lenarchik, a prisoner at Dachau, described how, after the camp's liberation, prisoners rushed out to greet the Americans, lifting them onto their shoulders in celebration. Meanwhile, other prisoners captured the SS guards. Elsewhere in the camp, SS guards, capos and informers were severely beaten with fists, sticks and shovels. In one incident, American soldiers turned a blind eye as two prisoners beat a German guard to death with a shovel. Another soldier saw a prisoner stomping on an SS trooper's face until it was severely disfigured. The soldier commented to the prisoner, "You've got a lot of hate in your heart," and the prisoner simply nodded in agreement. Additionally, an American chaplain reported that 3 young Jewish men who had escaped the camp during the liberation confessed to beating to death a particularly cruel SS guard they found hiding in a barn, disguised as a peasant. An American doctor, 30-year-old Captain David Wilsey, penned a 7-page letter to his wife Emily describing the reprisals. Wilsey stated that he did not feel a single disturbed emotion at witnessing the killings of the Nazis, whom he saw as beasts who deserved to be slaughtered. "The Nazi guards so had it coming," Wilsey wrote. The first thing the liberated prisoners did, according to Wilsey, was kill the Nazi dog handlers and their dogs, who had brutally killed many prisoners. Wilsey himself engaged in torturing the SS soldiers, depicting in his letter how he poured icy cold water on them while they were forced to stand at attention for extended periods of time before being shot by the liberators. However, the SS guards were not the only casualties during the liberation. Lieutenant Colonel Sparks, a battalion commander of the 157th Infantry Regiment, 45th Infantry Division, wrote about an incident involving German prisoners of war. He observed approximately 50 German POWs, captured by his regiment, being held in a coal storage area. This area was partially enclosed by an L-shaped masonry wall about 8 feet, 2.4 meters high, and located next to a hospital. The prisoners were guarded by a machine gun team from Company Y. Sparks left the guards to head toward the center of the camp, where some SS members had not yet surrendered. He had only gone a short distance when he heard a soldier shout, "They're trying to get away!" followed by the sound of machine gun fire from the area he had just left. Rushing back, he found a 19-year-old soldier nicknamed Bird Eye, operating the machine gun. Bird Eye had killed about 12 prisoners and wounded several more. The soldier, crying hysterically, claimed that the prisoners had attempted to escape. Sparks expressed doubt about this explanation and replaced the gunner with an NCO before continuing toward the center of the camp. Sparks later stated,
"It was the foregoing incident which has given rise to wild claims in various publications that most, or all of the German prisoners captured at Dachau were executed. Nothing could be further from the truth. The total number of German guards killed at Dachau during that day most certainly did not exceed 50, with 30 probably being a more accurate figure. The regimental records for that date indicate that over 1,000 German prisoners were brought to the regimental collecting point. Since my task force was leading the regimental attack, almost all the prisoners were taken by the task force, including several hundred from Dachau."
Heinrich Wicker, the 23-year-old SS officer, was executed shortly after the camp's surrender. He had been tasked with handing over the camp to the Allies after the previous commandant fled, leaving him in charge of 500 guards. A final photograph shows him standing by a death train filled with corpses. Reports suggest Wicker was either beaten by prisoners or shot by American soldiers, as he was found dead with a gunshot wound and a battered face. Doctor of Death, Dr. Klaus Schilling's gruesome execution. Dr. Klaus Schilling was born in Munich on July 5, 1871. He pursued a medical degree, earning his doctorate at 24. He became a professor of parasitology at the University of Berlin and served on the Malaria Commission of the League of Nations. Schilling practiced medicine in German colonized areas of Africa, focusing on tropical medicine and malaria. In 1905, he became the first director of tropical medicine at the Robert Koch Institute, a position he held for over 30 years until his retirement in 1936. After Hitler's rise to power, Schilling moved to fascist Italy, conducting experiments on psychiatric patients to combat malaria affecting Mussolini's troops during the Italo-Ethiopian War. The Nazis rewarded Schilling for aiding their ally, providing financial support for his research. In 1941, Schilling returned to Germany and was allowed by Heinrich Himmler to continue his malaria research at Dachau concentration camp. At Dachau, Schilling conducted inhumane experiments. Prisoners were injected with synthetic drugs at various doses, some lethal, and then exposed to malaria by strapping mosquito cages to their arms. Over 1,000 prisoners were infected, resulting in 300 to 400 deaths and many others suffering lifelong effects. His experiments also claimed the lives of numerous priests held at Dachau. According to a testimony, the patients used in the malaria experiments were Poles, Russians, and Yugoslavs. Following Dachau's liberation, Schilling, then 73, was arrested and tried as a war criminal. Although not a Nazi Party or SS member, he was charged with war crimes, along with 39 other defendants at the Dachau trials. Schilling admitted to conducting the experiments, but claimed they were for scientific advancement. During his trial, Schilling made a plea in English. Breaking down in tears at the end, he pleaded with the court to let him finish his research, albeit in a less destructive manner.
"I have worked out this great labor. It would be really a terrible loss if I could not finish this work. I don't ask you as a court, I ask you personally to do what you can. To do what you can to help me that I may finish this report. I need only a table and a chair and a typewriter. It would be an enormous help for science, for my colleagues, and a good part to rehabilitate myself."
Despite this effort, the tribunal sentenced Schilling to death by hanging on 13th December 1945. After his conviction, Schilling asked his lawyer not to appeal on his behalf, saying he would rather die than stay in prison. However, many in the German medical community protested on his behalf, calling him an honest and humane scientist. Nevertheless, Schilling's sentence was confirmed, and his execution took place at Landsberg Prison in Landsberg am Lech on 28th May 1946. When asked if he wanted to make a final statement, Schilling said,
I am not guilty, please. Get it over with.